guys, Natish here. So today we're just going on a cruise. My buddy Dill here with his soon-to-be single-turbo Nismo 370Z, and I figured, you know, we're cruising right now, so it must be a good as time as any to talk about the part 3 of the series I was doing about turbocharging the DE platform, right, and what you're gonna need for that. So the last video was completely about like supercharging, so now we're gonna go into turbo. So there's a couple of different kits you can go with, and you know, if you find a kit, any one of those kits used, you're pretty much in luck, right? My first choice would be the boosted performance kit. Everything from sound to ease of install to ease of maintenance, that is the kit to get. The standard kits, they actually come with a comp turbo on them, and those turbos are actually oilless. And they even have a waterless design coming soon, so you don't even need to fill oil in it. All you need to do is tap your coolant lines right to the turbo, and you're able to fill the turbo with coolant, and then all you have to do is fill it with grease every like 5,000 miles or something like that. So really easy to maintain. These kits, the same one I have on my car, it just connects to the stock headers. The turbo sits right down there beside the tranny, and the piping just goes into the intercooler, and the intercooler piping just goes into the intake manifold, and that's it. Your whole turbo kit's done. On my case, I asked for a precision turbo. So the precision turbo is air cooled, so I don't have to actually feed it coolant lines, but I have to feed it oil lines. And anytime you have a turbo mounted lower down, it can't gravity drain its oil back to the oil pan, so it needs an actual pump. So I have a pump in the bumper that came with the turbo kit called a Scavenge Pump, and that pump is able to pull the oil from the turbo and send it right back to the oil pan. So the things you're gonna need for that is basically the kit, and the kit actually comes with an oil pan spacer with a fitting on it. So it's pretty much everything you need. The boosted performance kit comes with almost everything. If you ask for fueling, it even comes with like the right injectors and the pump size. Now what I would recommend for pump is go for a 340 liter per hour pump and at least 700cc injectors. If you're looking to stay on a stock block, you should be able to make upwards of 400 wheel without any issues with that kit. There are other kits you can go with. For example, there are like the Momentum kit, also known as I think the Soho kit now, and that's essentially like a top mount. There's another one, I think it's called like SF or something like that. A couple of you guys I already know have it. That mounts a turbo on the both of them actually mounted on the driver's side. So there's different kits you can get, and they all pretty much do the same thing. The difference really comes down to the design of the piping, right? So the boosted performance kit is one of the only kits I know that uses equal length piping, and that's what you want. If you want the best possible sound to retain that VQ tone, you want to keep the equal length piping, right? That's why twin turbo cars sound so good, because it's all equal length. Right off of the headers, they have their turbo manifolds that feed into the turbos. It's all equal on both sides, and then twin turbos are really good because you can actually connect it right back into the, you know, right back into an exhaust system right at the Y pipe. The boosted performance actually comes with adapter pipe, so you can hook up like a Y back system. But if you have a motor dyne, you have to ask Sasha from Boosted Performance to get you like a custom mid pipe that connects from the down pipe to the motor dyne exhaust. Other than that, like, those are the main kits for a single turbo, and pretty much any turbo you go with should be able to get you like your 400 wheel. I went with a big 6870, but that's more for a built motor application, which we'll get into in a later video, right? When you're getting your turbo choice, there's something called the exhaust housing AR value, and that AR value determines how quickly, it's pretty much the size of your exhaust housing side of the turbo, and it's gonna dictate how quickly your turbo is able to spool. Like mine is a 1.32 AR, which is really big, so it's able to actually carry power in the top end of the RPM band. If you get like a 0.96 AR, it'll spool up a little bit quicker, but it might also taper off the power in the top end, and it kind of depends on what kind of car you want to build, right? You want a car that has power in the low end, or do you want to have a car that has power in the top end, or something in the middle, right? So I went for top end because obviously this is, you know, I'm built this to be a highway monster, so we went with the 1.32 AR. And that also changes by size of turbo, right? So if you get like a really small turbo with a really small AR, it's gonna spool like that. There'll be like no turbo lag, but your shit will drop off at the top end, right? So kind of, you know, consider what you want to do with regards to that. Now with twin turbo kits, you got quite a few. The most popular one that I've known of is the APS kit. My buddy Fion is running that on his twin turbo G35 Coupe, and he actually has a built motor going in soon, so you guys are going to be seeing that and everything involved with that soon as well. Now that twin turbo kit, he's making around a little over 400 wheel, and the car's running absolutely solid. The problem with those kits though is installing them is an absolute nightmare. Like everyone says pull the motor to install, which you should do, but my boy Fiona is such a gangster. This guy was able to put that kit in without pulling the motor, right? So just like kind of squeezing his fingers in, he made his own wrenches and shit to kind of put that kit together. So these kind of turbo kits, like, you know, they're sick, but you got to do a lot of work to put them on. When something happens, there's a leak, there's any kind of maintenance, you got to change a turbo or something, you're running into a bunch of bullshit to like remove and replace parts and things like that, right? So consider those. If you're not really mechanically inclined, the Booster Performance Kit's a perfect kit to kind of start learning and how to put it together. The directions are really straightforward. It's really easy to work with, right? So other than the APS kit, there are other twin turbo kits. Like there's a Grady twin turbo kit. My other buddy Marco has that. He's actually making 500 wheel on a stock block DE, which is amazing. He doesn't race it like a lot, but it's still running and driving nice, and he has like meth kit installed and all that. With twin turbo cars, because each of them are going to be running oil and coolant, so think about that. You have a coolant feed line from the block, you have a coolant into each turbo, right? So that's two there. You have coolant out of each turbo, you have coolant back into the circulation system, back into the engine, and then you have oil out of the engine, you have oil into each turbo, and then you have oil back into the engine at two spots. That's 12 lines and fittings that you have to deal with on a twin turbo setup. So think about the maintenance and the kind of like, you know, just the work involved in setting all that up, the possibilities for leaks and shit like that, right? For the twin turbo setup oil system, you're gonna have to run most likely an oil pan, all right? And that oil pan is gonna have to have 2 input points so that the oil can drain back into the oil pan, right? Now, another thing is, like, you rev up guys are a little bit luckier because the rev up oil pump is a little bit better than the non-rev up oil pump, because the rev up oil pump, you can rev it to, it's like rated to 7,500 RPM, which is awesome. The DE non-rev up guys got to do, you know, got to be a little bit more careful with the red line. Turbo requirements for fuel systems are not as demanding as supercharged systems. Like, you can get away with smaller injectors and pump, but obviously fuel is the main thing, right? So I would recommend just aim for like a 340 pump and aim for like 750cc injectors just to be safe. Some of you guys are going to be running E85. Keep in mind, E85 has a very high demand on fuel, so it actually requires a lot more fuel to run E85 setup than it does on a pump gas setup. Of course, you will have colder cylinder temperatures and you will be able to make more power. Look, we got a dirty pig over here. I gotta put my camera down a bit. My Waze just picked it up. Well, look, this radar, look, I don't know if I'm getting hit with laser or not. It's not going off at all. Oh, he has his ass out. He's not even fucking mooning the public and shit, yeah. Whatever. All right, so yeah, that's kind of your main shit with the turbo application. Like, a lot of it is kind of the same as supercharger. It's just there's less parasitic loss from the motor because the supercharger runs on a drive belt system, right? So with the turbo, you don't have that. The turbo just sits in the way of the exhaust gases coming out of the engine, and it spools the turbine, and you have compressed air that's being rushed into your engine, right? So that's how the engine is able to produce power, and it needs the fuel to match it. That's kind of your main shit. the main things, and that's how much does this shit cost, right? So on most cases, guys, for like a brand new kit from like Boosted Performance, I think they're listed around like 7 grand USD. I saw them make a post the other day, right? So that's what you're gonna be looking at, between 7 and 8 grand for like a brand new kit. Some are maybe even a little bit cheaper. What I would recommend, guys, if you can find a used kit for a good price, that's gonna be your best bang for a buck, right? The only problem is just know that sometimes not everything is included in the kit, so you may be kind of hunting around for certain things like injectors and stuff like that. For injectors, I've found the best thing you can do is go on like VQ Nation and find injectors on there, or all those like G and Z kind of Facebook pages. They're the best for finding parts. So that's where I would look. Injectors, usually you'd see, like, I bought like 750cc injectors for like 700 bucks. So that was pretty good, you know, stuff like that. Oil cooler is also a good recommendation if you're gonna be pushing the car really hard. But I've been running, guys, this car has been running. You guys have been seeing the pulls I've been doing and shit, and I have not had an oil cooler hooked up to this car as of yet, and it's been running mint. I think oil cooler will really become an issue if you're really pushing the upper speeds. That's when you're gonna have issues with oil temperature. So yeah, and I've also seen other guys with twin turbo setups running no oil coolers, and they've also been running fine. So you may be able to pass on that if you're just doing occasional highway pulls. But guys, remember, I have not gotten to like hot weather days yet. So once I do that, it could be possible that this car might run hot, and but by then I'll have my oil cooler set up for sure. So fuel pumps are usually around like 140 to 200 bucks for a good fuel pump. And then oil pan, like an oil pan with the twin ports on it. I usually got like this one on eBay that I've been running. It's been solid. They're like less than 200 bucks for the oil pan. Gauges are usually, you're gonna spend like, you know, at least like $300-400 on like good gauges, depending on what you're gonna run. And other than that, that's pretty much like your main components that you're gonna need. You're gonna need like a AFR sensor as well. It usually comes with the kit. Alright, so we just pulled the stop lamp fuse. I want to see if it works to brake boost. I just tried it a little bit. I think it is working, so let's try it right now in a second. One thing that's really different from the turbo setup to a supercharger setup is that the supercharger setup, the amount of boost you make is strictly dependent on the actual pulley that you're running. So you don't really need a boost controller, you just really need a gauge to watch how much boost you have. But on a turbo application, you want to be able to adjust your boost. So now you can just run off of whatever spring you set up in the wastegate, and that'll be your default boost level. But if you do install a boost controller, then you can actually set up like low boost, medium boost, high boost, right? So because with a supercharger setup, you're pretty much just running like full boost almost all the time, right? Unless you set it up in the maps or something that's a little bit different. I'm not too sure about that. A lot of the reliability is partly how you drive the car, how you maintain its oil, and a biggest factor of it is definitely going to be the tune. So you definitely want to make sure you have a reliable tuner, right? And just make sure you stay on top of maintenance. Ideally, when it comes to turbo cars, if the tuners can like keep the torque out of the low end, that's usually what I see. Like the cars with the cars that kind of last, their torque is kind of up higher in the RPM band, and the drivers tend to avoid lugging the motor by, you know, giving it full throttle below like 3,500 RPM. That kind of keeps from lugging the motor and putting a lot of stress on your rods. A lot of twin turbo kits they spool with like new gen turbos. They spool so goddamn fast that, you know, they provide a lot of shock to the rods at a low RPM. So that's the kind of thing, in my opinion, I would avoid. Everyone wants to spool quickly, but for the longevity of the stock block, it's something that can be kind of detrimental, right? So just try to aim for something that kind of spools in the mid to high end range. Now, a couple of things I wanted to go over was, now, if you are thinking of supercharging your car or turbocharging your car, I'm just gonna let you know on the likelihood of what might happen to you, okay? Here's how it goes. You do NA full bolt-on, right? You're loving it, you're like, yo, this car is sick. I just wish it had a little bit more to it, but you've done all you can really do in a full bolt-on tune kind of way, right? So then you start looking into boost, and what's the cheapest thing you can start with? Unless you find a turbo kit for like cheap, luckily, somewhere, chances are you're gonna be looking at supercharger setups, right? Because they're usually around 3,500 or so, either US or even Canadian, for like a used Vortec. Oh fuck, there's a cop, hold on. So I don't know if you guys noticed that, but that radar didn't freaking go off worth the shit, and that was a, you know, Peel Police cruiser. So I don't know, we gotta see what's going on with that thing. But yeah, anyway, so you finish your, you know, NA full bolt-on setup, and you look at that cheap supercharger kit, and you're like, yo, you know what, this is gonna be sick. So here's what's gonna happen. You're gonna put it on your car. It's gonna be absolutely awesome. You're gonna love it. It's gonna make a good, like, you know, 400 wheel if you follow like the directions I gave you in the last video, and you'll have fun with it. But what's gonna happen is you're gonna race a couple cars, right? And you're gonna race your, you know, E92 M3s. You might race your like E60 M5s and like whatnot. And you'll have a couple of like, you'll gap the E92. You might have a close run with the E60, and like it'll be a fun car overall. A lot of usable power, I gotta tell you that. You can come around a bend and just fucking mat it, and that shit will pull right out of the corner, full throttle, ripping all the way to red line, banging gears. It'll be sick, right? But you might get just a taste of what power really feels like, and that's the point when you go, shit, I want more. And that's when you totally just fucked yourself up, because now you're like, okay, what do I do, right, to get more power? So now you're looking at, okay, do I upgrade the supercharger to like a, you know, TI trim blower or SI trim blower and like all this shit to make more power? But you're already at basically what the, you know, supercharger can really hold in terms of power, right? And I mean, in terms of the motor stock block. So that's when you end up actually looking at turbo setups and building the motor. And I told you we'll get into the build motor stuff a little bit later on in another video, but today we're talking about turbo setups, right? And to really get that, you know, feel that torque power, you want to have a turbo setup with it, because it gives you like a meteor torque band, right? You end up usually making like that 400 wheel torque that you really want to see for like a car that pulls hard. Keep in mind though, when you exceed the upper like 400 wheel torque limit of these motors stock, that's when you start running into like blowing motors and shit like that. So just like worry about that just a little bit, but be careful. So what I'm trying to say essentially is that supercharger is like a gateway drug to turbo, okay, and bigger power. So that happened to me. Look where I ended up. I fucked up, all right? But yeah, so that's the main thing. Now, with regards to turbo setup, I'm going to be attaching, we're going to probably link up with my boy Fion soon, and I'm going to show you guys his twin turbo G35 Coupe. He's making around 400 wheel, and he has a built motor that he's dropping in very soon. So we're going to have him around like, you know, I'm trying to get him to do the fuel system and make close to 600, but he's kind of trying to stay more on the safer side for now. But he's going to most likely be around 500 wheel. Now, with regards to layouts of these turbo kits, so you have basically your simple setups, which are your top mount, your mid mount, and your rear mount turbo setups, right? For single turbo. Top mount usually in the engine bay replaces like where the air filter sits. It could be on either side, depends on the setup, right? A mid mount setup is what I have, which is underneath the car on the passenger side of the transmission. And then a rear mount setup, I don't know if you've ever seen this before, but if you want to look it up, there's a company called STS. I think they're done now, but STS Turbo Kit had a turbo setup in where the muffler sits under the trunk. It was a pretty cool setup. Sounded like a jet engine, basically, kind of like my car, but like back in the day shit. So that's a setup you could, you know, these are the So these are the type of setups you can run for single turbo, right? In terms of kits, you have, I heard of this new kit called Rev 9. I'm gonna get some details about that kit. I haven't ran it or anything. I know a couple of people running it really nice. And the kits I've seen a lot of are like Soho Motorsports kit. You got your Momentum single turbo kit. You have your Boosted Performance mid-mount single turbo kit. And as you've heard in my videos previously, I have always recommended the BP kit. It's just stupid easy to install. You get to keep that VQ tone you know you want to have with the turbo kit. And that's the main thing, right? With regards to like oil, that does become a factor because the top mount kits you see, they mount on the top of the engine bay. And when you have a top mount engine bay kit, you basically don't have to really worry about oil because you can just gravity drain that from a drain line right down into the oil pan. Traction control. Phones be dropping off. Now with regards to single turbo versus twin turbo, that's a big factor, right? It's all about what you want. Now, if you buy an old twin turbo kit, you might be thinking, everyone thinks, oh yeah, twin turbos spool way faster than single turbos. That is bullshit. I'll give you an example, which you'll see on my boys' VHR cars. We have one guy who has a much older twin turbo kit, the old gritty twin turbo kit with upgraded turbos, versus the other guy who has a single turbo kit from Boosted Performance. The single turbo kit actually spools faster and makes more power all over the place than the twin turbo kit. Why is that? Because new age turbos spool way faster than the old shit. So now you can run a new gen single turbo and have wicked quick spool, quicker than the old twins. But keep that in mind, it works the same way, right? New twins will spool way faster and make power way earlier, right? So if you end up getting like these APS twin turbo kit, Greddy twin turbo kit, GTM twin turbo kit, right? These kind of kits are generally going to have your older turbos because these kits were manufactured a long time ago, right? And unless the person you're buying it off upgraded the kit and they have like newer shit, it's a different story. But keep in mind, you may not necessarily want turbos that spool that friggin' fast, because what happens is when you spool that fast, it's a big shock. It's a big shock to the internals at the low end of the RPM band. So you want to be careful running, such quick spooling turbos low end. You can actually bend rods with shit like that, right? So definitely you want something that like you kind of get your foot in a little bit, get to like 3,500 RPM or so, and then feed the throttle in through 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 RPM. That's going to be a good, clean setup, safe setup, okay? So yeah. Those kits are older now and they all have older turbos, so they actually are just, they're not laggy, but they're just as laggy as like new single turbo kits. So don't let that be a determining factor between single and twin, okay? If you're just thinking about, oh, it's gonna lag, right? My shit lags, but that's because of many reasons, okay? Here's why a turbo can lag. One, the size, obviously. Two, the exhaust housing itself. So you can get a same size turbo in different exhaust housing sizes, right? You can get, like, for example, really small exhaust housing like 0.69 or 0.7 or 8 or 0.9. Those will spool fairly quick. Mine is fat as hell. It's a 1.32 AR exhaust housing, and I did that because I wanted all highway power. All right, so that's why we did that. So that's one thing you got to look at in terms of turbo sizing. And if you get small turbos with low AR, that shit's gonna spool quick. If you get small turbos with big AR, it'll take longer to spool. Same thing with a single. Okay, so those are one of the main factors. Now with locationing with twin turbo kits, they're almost all pretty much the same. Your headers get replaced with these, like, think of them like little tiny headers, right? They grab 3 cylinders at a time and they join those 3 cylinders into a port, and that port immediately fits to the turbo. So you essentially have like your turbos mounted right on each side of the motor, right pretty much where your headers used to be. And the reason for that is because the quicker you get that exhaust gas into the turbo, the quicker you spool it up, right? So turbo placement is key. And what happens is those turbos, they collect that gas and they spool it, and then you're able to actually have simple downpipes that connect into like any kind of standard catback exhaust that you were running before, whether it be a motor dyne, Tomei, whatever it may be. So single turbo setups get more complicated with the exhaust. You sometimes have to run like a custom downpipe, so that you can attach your exhaust to the turbo kit downpipe. Tuning wise, you just gotta go to, you know, your big guys. You got your admin tuning, you got your Sol Nismo Knights, you got your RZG, and I think all of them do remote tuning now, so you can hit those guys up if you're not close by them. If you're in Toronto, I still recommend going to Tony from Dyna Motorsports for your tuning. You know, local shop, it can't hurt. And like, you know, I've been happy with his tune so far. All my buddies are tuned by him. Cars are ripping absolutely beautifully. So definitely a recommendation to go with Tony from Dyna Motorsports there. But yeah, that's basically, you know, it. You can be tuned on up rev, you can be tuned on a Haltech ECU setup like I have, but in my opinion, if you're just stock motor, like the up rev shit's fine. And if you can use ECU tech, that's even better for safety reasons. But yeah, up rev solid. And you have your main tuners like Admin Tuning and whatnot, and Tony from Dyna Motorsports are usually the ones I'd recommend. And if you're in the Cali region, Sol, Nismo, Knights, those are kind of like your, you know, big three that I usually would recommend using. So yeah, that's pretty much it for a turbo setup. If you guys have any questions, again, just, you know, give me a shout. Be happy to answer them. I hope you guys enjoyed that video. I'll be sure to, you know, dump some ripping footage in this clip so you guys don't get too bored of just me talking. And have a good time. Easy.